chronos of time. We ask it in your name. Amen. Last week, we spoke about the different decades that there are in our lives. And we used this little diagram over here. I explained to you how I'd found this truth and how it had sort of evolved into different thinkings. And we've used this in different contexts. But it's great that I get to preach this stuff today. And I hope that it will be indeed meaningful to you. We said this, that in the average person's life, there are a number of decades. I have 9 here. But we spoke about the first decade of life, and that is the years of 1 to 10. And the question that every kid, 1 to 10, is asking, not do you love me, but do you like me? Will you be willing to invest in me? Are you going to give me time? Are you going to be a part of my life? Or are you going to push me to the corner and ignore me? You see, love is presumed, but like is desired. That's the first 10 years. The second 10 years is the age between 10 and 20. And this is the big answering the question of who am I? It's a question of identity. Am I who the gang down the road says I am? Am I who my parents or my teachers say I am? Or am I who my Father God says I am? When you find out all that God says about you and who you are in Him, your identity is found secure. So don't look to the world to tell you who you are. Let's look to God. And then we said in the third decade of our lives, between the ages of 20 to 30, 2 big questions are asked. What am I going to do with my life? And who's going to do it with me? Who am I going to share this life with? And we looked at some of the questions of this life and how to answer them. I encourage you, if you haven't seen that, go back onto the last couple of services so you can do a bit of a catch-up. But we ended last week with using that verse, Ephesians 5, verse 16, and it says this, redeem the time. Redeem the time. Redeem means to value. We need to re-evaluate, redeem this thing, the time as. And it says why? Because the days are very, very evil. Have a look around you. The days have always been evil. I'm not sure they're any more evil now than they were back 2,000 years ago. But the principle is still the same. Redeem the time because the days are evil. Let's pick up on our decades, shall we? Let's move to the decade of 30 to 40 years. This is an intriguing place. So much could go wrong during this period of time. And the picture that I have for you is the picture of a chicken without his head. It's an absolute masterpiece here. Have you ever seen a chicken without his head? It's running around all over the place, every which way it runs, seeking to find a place where they cannot see, doesn't know where it is. And I think during the 30s to 40s, that would be a good picture of many young people in that generation and in that particular time. The question we're asking is, how do I manage all the demands and the expectations laid upon me in this time? How do I manage a boss who is demanding? How do I manage the responsibility of marriage? How do I manage the responsibility of competitors and business out there? How do I contain my ethical principles in life? How do I manage morality? How do I manage the demands the church lays on me? How do I manage the burden that sometimes relationships can create in my life? You see, at this stage in life, so much can go wrong. And the sad thing is that not many good men and women finish well. That's a tragedy. Have a look at the Bible and you see this principle to be true. There's King Saul in the Old Testament. So full of potential, so full of ability naturally given to him, and yet he ended up in a mess, taking his own life. What went wrong in this man who started off so well? What went wrong between there and the end of his life? Not many good men and women finish well. Probably an even greater example would be Solomon. Solomon just pulled it out of the bag at the very end. But Solomon, too, a man known for incredible wisdom, but he didn't apply his own wisdom. And he allowed foreign gods to come into his home. And he almost didn't finish well at all. Fortunately, he finished okay. He repented and he restored and all these things. But he missed out on the blessing of everything that God had for him. And he, too, didn't finish nearly as well as he possibly could have. So you say, well, What's the problem? Well, it's very simple. Somebody changed the price tags. Somebody put the wrong value on the wrong thing. And at this particular age in life, it's about values, because all your values are now going to start to be tested. And you're going to be testing your moral values, your ethical values, your time values, all of those things at this very chaotic, busy time in life, when you've got a career that's growing and kids that are coming. You've got to manage yourself incredibly well during this period of time. I guess the greatest test that happens during the 30s to the 40s is the test of character. Like I've said, your test of character is going to determine the upholding of your moral principles. It's an issue of character. Some people are looking for a shortcut at this stage. They want a shortcut to success, a shortcut to fame. I don't know any shortcuts out there that are going to do it. Shortcuts like Jacob thought he'd take a shortcut to affluence and to influence when he stole his brother's birthright. That was a shortcut for him. After he did it, he had sleepless nights. He was a miserable, miserable human being because he fell into the trap of that stage in his life. His character couldn't pass the test of resisting the shortcuts. It's a time of where it's like charisma versus character. You know, at certain times we have people who evidence incredible charisma like Paul and Saul and Solomon. Great charisma. And yet charisma without character leads to chaos, which was the evidence in their life. And so you can have as much gifts and as much charisma and personal abilities as you like, but if it's built on the foundation of a weak character, you're in a lot of trouble. Let me draw you a little picture that some of you will be familiar with. And it's a picture of a small yacht. Living here on the coast, we see these things going out into the water, and they look awesome. They look awesome. And they look very sweet, and they wonder, but I've often wondered, in the midst of a storm, when the wind blows, and it's not just a little bit of a nice bow there where you can sit and you can talk to your buddies and hold on to the sail, it's a time of incredible roughness and storm, and the wind is hammering on the sail, and I often wonder, what keeps that little yacht afloat? Why does it not sink? Some of them sink. And I see even in the statistics of life, shipwrecks along the shore of life because they had not got one thing right over here. Just one thing. You see, what keeps a little yacht upright in the midst of heavy winds is what they call a keel underneath. And sometimes 70 to 80% of the weight of this entire yacht is below the waterline. You don't see it. You don't know it's there. You only see the evidence of it in the midst of a storm. So if you want to survive some of the storms of life, have a look at my little yacht. We need to do a lot more work on the areas of our character, the life below the waterline. This is where your character lives. This is where the principles and your ethics and the morals of life live below the waterline. And when these are tested and you stand the test of the storm, your entire yacht is going to be fine. But if you fail at this point, you become a statistic and a shipwreck along the shoreline of life. We spend a lot of time, do we not, looking good on the top above the waterline stuff. We probably, if I were to be right, we probably spend 80% of our energy looking good instead of putting 80% of the energy of preserving ourselves in the event of a storm of life. It's about a development of character and a strength of character. There's no period in time greater than this to test your strength or your weakness of character. Now you say, how do we do that? Well, it's not difficult. There's a mentor out there. I love the idea of mentoring. Unfortunately, it's the most neglected of all relationships. We have many different relationships of boss and wives and children and kids and all that kind of stuff. But probably today, one of the most neglected relationships out there is the relationship of a mentor to a person. Now, a mentor is nothing new. We have a look in the scriptures and we see Joshua had Moses as his mentor. We see David, King David had Nathan the prophet probably as a mentor. We see Timothy, the wonderful man, having Paul the apostle as his mentor. We see Mark having Barnabas and Paul having Silas. All of these people had somebody in their lives to keep them on track and to help them and warn them about the tests that they were going to need to pass. A couple of interesting things about a mentor. A mentor, you must know, cannot be your boss, because your boss has got another agenda. He wants you to be successful so you can make him look good. He wants you to be successful so he can use you to make more money. He cannot be a mentor. A friend does not make a good mentor either, because a friend you do know is going to be somebody who tells you what you want to hear. A mentor is going to be somebody who tells you what you need to hear. And there's a very good, in fact, when your friend becomes, or your mentor becomes a friend, he cannot be your mentor anymore. He's crossed a certain line. A parent, I'm intrigued with this. A parent is more of a role model person than a mentor. Yeah, I guess there's a bit of a mentorship role that parents can play in helping to guide their kids after their kids are a certain age. But at the end of the day, parents are role models to their children. We have to find somebody outside of us, somebody who's not somebody we're going to have Sunday lunch with and be the best of friends with, somebody who's not my voice of authority, but is somebody who will speak into my life from it, as it were, a distance. It's quite crazy. I can sometimes see people's lives more clearly than they can because I'm standing at a distance. When you're so involved in the whole thing, all you can see is this and that, and she said this, and he did this, and the boss said this, and all you can see is that, and you're stuck in the midst of this, like a cartoon, in the midst of all the smoke and the dust. And somebody like me standing on the outside, and I'm saying, hey guys, I think I can see this more clearly than you. And when I'm in the midst of the dust, there's somebody out there who can see my mess clearer than me. It's because of that objective and not subjective relationship that we need to calculate. Take for a moment my little ship, my little boat over here, and let's turn this thing, put it on steroids for a little while, and let's turn our yacht into a battleship. A battleship. I don't know quite what a battleship would look like, but it's got guns and it's got all sorts of stuff. It's a battleship. And this boy can weather many, many, many storms because he's so big and he's so strong. Now, if you take this and put it into that, we look at the life of a battleship, and a battleship is very powerful. But there is something more powerful than a battleship, and that is a lighthouse. Now, you've heard the story, I'm sure, about the battleship in the midst of the mist, and the storm is out there, and he sees a light, and he signals to the light. He says, hey, listen, we're a battleship. You need to change course. And the light comes back to say, we suggest you change course because I'm a lighthouse. And you know who wins? Because the lighthouse is a source of truth. He's not going to move. He's always there. He will continually shine through rain or good or sunshine or whatever. The lighthouse is a constant. And there is only one constant that you need in your life at this stage in your life, and that is the constant of truth. You've got to find somebody who's going to tell you the truth about life. And he doesn't have to be your friend. In fact, he can't be your friend because then you won't like him anymore. But somebody who will tell you like a lighthouse, will stand as a beacon of not just hope, but a beacon of truth to you. This is what a mentor does. Now, the problem with us and human nature is we are full of pride. We, humanly speaking, don't like somebody to come in and say something to us about truth, because we have the truth. We know what truth is. Truth for us means this, and it's all relative to me. But there is an ultimate truth that mentors have an ability, a good mentor will be able to guide you to. The problem from us in this area is we're so darn proud. We think I can do it on my own. People, you can't do it on your own. Well, you can, but you'll fail. The problem here is pride. And then by nature, we tend to glorify self-made men, do we not? Self-made woman who came out of the gutter and did their stuff, and look at them now. Nobody, they were an island, they were a lone ranger. And the movies glorify these people. Well, I got to tell you, it might work in the movies, but it seldom works in life. Everybody needs somebody like a mentor, but we're proud. Proverbs 15, verse 22 says this, plans go wrong for lack of advice. Many advisors bring success. And then in verse 12 of that same proverb, he says, mockers hate to be corrected, so they stay away from the wise because they know the wise are going to tell them the truth. They're the lighthouse. So during this particular phase in your life, we need to find, you guys, you young couples need to find somebody who can speak into your life, an objective voice that can keep you on track. You may not always like what they have to say, but that's what a mentor does. He can save you so much pain and so much heartache if you just learn from him. I had a man come into my life, and I was just a teenager. His name was Uncle George, and I loved Uncle George. He was quite a controversial kind of character in the church, but he was very adamant, very outspoken. But I liked this elderly man. And he sort of spoke very strongly and almost aggressively into my life. And I took it in. I listened to him. And I can remember visiting Uncle George. He worked at a departmental store called Meikle's up in Zimbabwe. And I used to visit him when I'd ride my bicycle to school. And in the afternoon, I'd pop in at Uncle George. I thought he was like the managing director, but he sat in a little corner of the warehouse. He had a chair and a table, and there was a plastic cup there for me when I would visit. And I would love to visit Uncle George and ask him questions. Now, I must admit, I didn't always like what he had to say, but generally he was right about what he had to say. And then one day we went to the same church. We had a youth meeting. And I was the leader of the youth group, and there were probably 20 or 30 kids in our youth group, and we were going on an outing, and they were all there at the church, and they were excited. They were waiting for me to arrive. Well, I arrived 20 minutes late, thinking nothing of it, thinking, hey, I'm the youth leader. Don't mess with me. I'm the youth leader. I didn't know that Uncle George was standing at the door of the church, and he was watching this. And when I arrived, he called me. He said, hey, I need to talk to you. He said, what time were you meant to leave? I said, no, Uncle George, it's 3 o'clock. And he looked at his watch and says, it's 20 past 3, and you've only just arrived. So I said, oh, yeah, Uncle George, it's okay. No, that's cool. And I turned around to go away, and he said, no, don't go away. He said, I want you to do a little maths with me. How many kids are there here? And I said, well, there's about 20 kids. He said, well, 20 kids by 20 minutes, you add the math, do the maths, that's 20 by 20, that's 400 man-minutes that you have wasted of these kids' lives. And then with a voice, he turned around and he said, I'm sure you could do better than this. I have never forgotten that moment. It didn't stop me from loving him. I just knew he was telling me the truth. And since that day, I have become very attentive to the issues of time. Now, if you're going to be late, that's okay. But he said to me, he said, oh, you're late. Did your car break down? And I said, no, my car didn't break down, Uncle George. He said, well, you must have had an emergency. I said, no, Uncle George, didn't have an emergency. And he said, well, you could have done a lot better than this. And he walked away. And even now, it's not like I'm neurotic. I might be attentive, but I hate being late for anything. And if I am, it's generally because I have a decent reason, because we live in a fallen world, and sometimes we do have those reasons. But in my mind, I'm thinking, don't waste people's time. People's time is valuable. They're living in Chronos time. And I am arrogant enough to waste their time. Uncle George spoke truth to me that day, and I'll never forget it. The next aspect of your life is how satisfied am I with my life? And this is the age between the 40s to the 50s. We're all asking, how satisfied am I with life? So what I have for you here is a rugby ball. And many of you have heard me talk about this principle before, and I can't find a better one. I think it's awesome. And that is the principle of half time. You know, in a rugby game, people will go out there, bash themselves and run and sweat and blood and all sorts of stuff. And at half time, they come back into the shelter. And I try to tell you, I've played a little bit before, and I've been in half time. And I've thought, when they come to halftime, nobody's drinking coffee and rusks at halftime. No. You know why you come to halftime? Is that at halftime, you have 10 minutes to evaluate the first half and to plan the second. And according to the successes and the failures of the first half, you now have 10 minutes to plan the second half. So at the end of the day, you can possibly win the game. Now, when you hit your 40s to 50s, people, it's half time. You're halfway dead. if 80 is your time. You're halfway dead. And now it's a great time for you to take time out there to say, based upon the successes and failures of the first half of my life, let me plan the second half. Some people at this time in life go crazy. Midlife is not always a happy time for some. It can be a crisis for some. And you all know, men, you've heard this when you get a big gold chain and blow dry your chest hair and buy a Harley Davidson, you know you're at half time and you know you're in a midlife crisis. You do know that. So watch out for that stuff. But what happens at halftime is we look at our significant others at this stage in our life. At every stage in your life, you have a significant other. When you're born, your mother, because she feeds you. When you're a kid, your teacher, because your teacher's your source of authority. When you're a teenager, your peers become your significant others. When you get to 20 to 30, you see the opposite sex become the thing, and you begin to look for a life partner. And then when you hit your 30s to 40s and your 40s to 50s, all of a sudden, your contemporaries start to become your significant other. You look over the fence. Oh, dear me. My neighbor's bought a bigger car than me. Look again. Oh, my word, my neighbor's built a bigger pool than me. Oh, my word, my neighbor has sold this house. He's gone to another house, and another person's come in here. And we begin to compare ourselves with our contemporaries. And it's a terrible, terrible situation to be. It can suck you dry. We become incredibly gullible to advertising. Advertising tells you everything that they think that you need. You don't need that stuff, people. But advertising's greatest job is to convince you that you do. We begin to ask the questions, when is enough enough at this stage? We've done our work, we've promoted, we've fought the way up through the corporate ladder, and we're asking ourselves, when is enough enough? Is enough ever enough? I'm not sure that it is in some people's lives. In Psalm 23, it says this. It says that when we get through life, our cup is full. And according to the psalmist, his cup is overflowing. So what do we do when we have an overflowing cup? Well, many people in this stage will get rid of that cup and get a bigger cup. They'll get, because they don't want to share it with anybody. But in the psalm, it says, my cup overflows. Like those champagne cups, you pour it at the top and it overflows into the next one, into the next one, into the next one. That's a great picture of what our lives should be. When the cup overflows, don't buy a bigger cup. Let it overflow to the people around you. So you say, what has this got to do with my midlife issues? Well, here's the deal. The greatest problem between your 30s and 40s is the challenge, is pride. But the greatest need of your 40s to 50s is for courage. Because over here, you have to challenge some of the norms and standards that have become bad habits in the 30s to the 40s. You need a lot of courage to be able to confront some of those patterns of behavior. You've got to resolve to do certain damage control over certain poor decisions. You've got to take courage to regard the truth that you have been shown by the mentor of those earlier years. So there's two things you need to do at halftime. The first thing is you need to fix up. You need to fix up the things that you can, and you need to stop the rot. And if you need to find help to do that, for goodness sake, do it. You know, our lives, I often talk about lives in different contexts, but your life is full of little compartments. There's your family compartment, your work one, your church one, your devotional one, your sports one, your habits one, your TV one. Every one of our lives is made up of different compartments. And what happens is this, is that on each compartment there happens to be a lid. And what happens is when it goes toxic in one of those compartments and we leave the lid off, what happens? All the gunk flows out of that compartment and finds itself a home in the compartments around. It's like a cancer. It's toxic. All because it was in one area of your life. So when your marriage is not going well, there needs to be a time when you say, in this box, I'm going to fix this thing. I'm going to put a lid on it, and I'm going to fix what's in the box. Within these four walls, I have to fix this thing, because if you leave the lid on, it's going to get into your work, it's going to get into your spiritual life, it's going to get into everything. Fix what's in the box and then put the lid back on so it can't exude or ooze out into the other areas of your life. You've got to manage your life like that. And then secondly, you've got to ask yourself the question that we've been deliberating over in our early morning devotionals. Please watch this, because I'm finding some amazing devotional truths that we need to share about. And the question we're asking right now is the question of the big one thing, the one thing that if you did it in your life, it would make a whole bunch of other things either easier to do or completely unnecessary to do, if you could find that one thing. Instead of trying to fix the fruit of a messed up life and all the different aspects of it, what you need to do is get to the root. And if you can fix that one thing, the root, watch what happens to the fruit. It fixes itself. And so we're asking ourselves, what is the one thing that if I did it at this stage in my life, what is that one thing that if I did it would make a whole bunch of other things easier to do or even unnecessary? Well, Paul says in Philippians 4, verse 11 and 12, he says, I have learned the secret. He's found the one thing. He's found it. And it goes on, in any and every situation, whether I'm living in plenty or in want, you say, what's the secret? He tells you there. The secret is being content. Man, if we could just learn contentment, people, being content in the situations of life, it would avoid us so many of the pitfalls of that would come from this stage and this stage being put together, where we become so obsessed with stuff. Man, getting in a lot of trouble. This stupid obsession. And it's only when you get down to here that you realize that that was a mistake, a big mistake in your life. The one thing to living in this box is to find contentment. Find contentment. Now, when we move to the 50s and 60s, what are we going to do with that? Now the question changes to ask, what needs to change in the second half of my life? You've done the halftime thing, so if nothing changes, nothing changes. So you've got to be courageous enough, which is the principal value that we need over here. We've got to ask, well, if something needs to change, what's going to change when I hit this stage? Now, for many people, I need to draw another little thing over here for you. I've told you already in that first stage, you've got to fix what's in the box. But in that particular stage of the 50s to 60s, if you fix what's in the box, you can now begin to see what's outside of the box. And the answer to the 50s and to 60s is to look and live outside of the box. You've done the inside stuff. Now you can look outside. So we do this little exercise. I'm sure many of you know it. We draw 9 dots, and I say to you, you've got 3 straight lines. And with three straight lines, I'd like you to draw something that will go through all of these boxes. And so you think, oh, you puzzle it out, and you try and work it out, but there's always one dot that hasn't been covered. So the answer to the quiz is simply this. You go like this. The answer to the dilemma lives outside of the box. And in your 50s to 60s, you're saying, that's where I've got to look. And here's a terminology I love. I forget the name of the guy who came up with this terminology, where he talks about success versus significance. You spent the first half of your life finding success, and I have nothing against that. But I need to tell you, success on its own is totally overrated. You don't want to die successful. You do, however, want to die significant. So you say, well, how do I die significant? You find what's outside of the box, and you do something that nobody wants to do, is you sacrifice. You say, you mean I have to sacrifice my success? Indeed you do. And so in this phase of your life, I draw for you here the masterpiece of an altar. An altar. And on that altar is wood and a fire, where you sacrifice your success for the good of those around you. This is an unpopular message in today's materialistic age, where he who has the most dies for the most toys wins. That's the philosophy that is out there. But as you look into your life and you say, how can I take what I have done? I have been blessed You know why? You know what I'm going to say? I have been blessed so that I can be a blessing. That's what it's about. That's why you've been blessed. You haven't been blessed that you can be a hoarder. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about your life. I'm talking about your experience. I'm talking about all those things that you can add value to somebody else's life. Now, here's an interesting thing. During the 50s to the 60s, life changes yet again. You'll notice it's an interesting time because during that time, parents generally will start to pass away. Kids will leave home, and it leaves a huge hole in your life when that goes. And now you find yourself stuck in a vacuum, and a vacuum is wanting to be filled. That's what a vacuum wants. It's saying and it's not fussy about what it fills itself with. A vacuum will fill itself with depression. A vacuum will fill itself with negative thinking. A vacuum will fill itself with pessimism. A vacuum will fill itself with you finding that you have no purpose. You've lost your identity. And if you're not careful at this stage in your life, when the parents have died and the kids are gone, you're going to find the vacuum is going to suck in a whole bunch of really miserable stuff. So what do? You use your success and you pour it onto this altar and you say, God, I want to give this back to you. It's yours anyway, for goodness sake. And I want to pour this into the lives of the people around me. And by so doing, you turn success into significance through sacrifice. Some time back, it must have been 2 years ago, I was flying on a plane in the United States, and the plane was full, and there was a man across the aisle from me, and I love to talk to people on an airplane, and him and I struck up a conversation, this man and I asked him what he did. He was very wealthy. He'd been an entrepreneur, started many businesses, had done incredibly well, and he's now about to hit his 60s. So he says, well, I'm turning 60 soon. I said, oh, so are things going to change in your life? He says, oh, absolutely they are. I said, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to do is I'm just going to enjoy life. And he went on to tell me how he was going to enjoy life. And at the end of that, I said, enjoy life. What a waste. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean, what a waste? I've earned all this. I've worked hard. I've worked long nights. I've made big sacrifices for myself to be able to have this stuff. I said, what a waste. And then he said to me, what do you mean by that? I said, you're going into the best years of your life right now with a selfish motive. It's all about you. How about this? I bet you that there are a whole bunch of young businessmen out there who are crying out for somebody like you to come and draw alongside them and to encourage them and to mentor them in the issues of business. I bet that there are a whole bunch of people out there that you could join a service club, you could start a ministry, you could join a church, and you could use some of your success to be a blessing to the world around us. And the man, after some discussion, he looked at the guy next to him, he said, hey, why has nobody ever told us this stuff before? Anyways, we got off the airplane, he almost had tears in his eyes, he turned to me and he said, thank you for that conversation. That's changed a lot about how I think. And I thought to myself, here it is. Somebody needs to tell you people in this age group, you have a lot to give. Don't sit on it. Don't hoard it. Whether it be finances, experience, abilities, teacher, whatever it can be, pour it into the next generation or into somebody who you could add value to. It's all about sacrifice. I guess at a certain time in our 20s to 30s, I told you that the challenge here was between your career and your calling. At this stage in your life, the challenge is between your comfort and your calling. Please don't let comfort overwhelm you. Comfort is seriously overrated. Find something that makes you mad in the world. I'm mad about injustice. I will go to the grave fighting against all phases and types and styles of injustice because I'm mad about it. I'm not just glad that I didn't suffer injustice like that. I'm not just sad because I see people suffering like that. I'm not just glad that I don't get to do. I am mad at injustice. And I want to tell you what a great investment for your life. People, if I get to bury you, I don't want to bury you successful. I would love to bury you significant. We're about to have